22 years. I'm from Australia, but I'm a US citizen since 1992. I've got a wife and 2 children. And you know, I'm a Christian, I believe in limited government, and I believe in obeying the law. And you know, like everybody, you know, except for when we shouldn't obey the law. And that's not what I'm here about tonight, because we didn't break the laws. Are there any law enforcement here tonight? DA? Any assistant DAs here? No? Right here. What's your name, sir?
David Woodland.
David, welcome. Thanks.
Thank you.
And I wanted to ask that because don't think poorly of Brett Ligon. He is a diligent law enforcement official, and he's an honourable man. He's a straight shooter and somebody you can really depend on, I believe. Can you hear me? Oh. Anyone work for the Woodlands Development Company here tonight? Anyone related to the Road Utility District? Just wanted to know. So anyway, you want me to talk about special districts a little bit. So special districts are a creation of the legislature, and they were really enabled. You know, they talk about enabling legislation. Well, constitutionally, they were enabled back in 1904. There's Article 3, Section 52 is where you find the enabling legislation or the enabling constitutional article for road utility districts. And really, I think they came into being with rural areas in mind. You know, the cities had all the resources and so on, and you know, they would build infrastructure in whatever method they used. But you know, the farmers and ranchers out there, you know, they had flood control districts and water needs and all kinds of things. And, you know, we ended up with electric utilities and stuff like that, although they're not that kind of special district. School districts are special districts. Hospital districts, I believe, are special districts also. So, you know, they do have legitimate purpose. And, you know, they're there to serve, like any government. Any unit of government is really there to serve the people, right? Serve the people. That's right. That's what they're there for. And it's meant to serve the public at large, not a special interest. And you know, when we get, oh, you got my little, how am I going to change that? Where's the...
That mouse, you can roll that roller up or down.
Oh, and it'll change it.
It should change it.
Yeah, you see my little thing there, that's Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 4. Something is rotten in Denmark. That's kind of the theme for my presentation. Because, you know, something doesn't smell right about some of these arrangements that we have. And oh, anyone live in the Woodlands here? Anybody? Oh, there's quite a few. Oh, that's good too. Because you know, I'm surrounded by the Road Utility District. You know, I live up here. Just right up here, right there. That's where I live. And you know, there's about 100,000 people living there now, they reckon. And whenever you go anywhere, you go via the Road Utility District. And whenever you shop in the Woodlands, you're shopping in the Road Utility District, which levies the tax for to support the Road Utility District.
How much money do they collect each year?
About $6 million in revenue to service the bonds. And you know, we'll get to the bonds and everything, but this is really, I'm going to kind of give a little story of, you know, what happened, how did this come to pass, you know. And it starts with my, you know, what motivated me? Well, a Republican form of government, you know. When I was a young man, about 25, 30 years ago, when I first came to the United States, you know, I had not really heard about limited government. You know, I grew up in Australian schools, and you know, I didn't go to school very much anyway. So you know, I didn't get exposed to the general education about forms of government and stuff, and certainly not about the US, you know, separation of powers and so on. It would have been parliamentary government. You know, Australia has a constitution, and half of it mimics the US Constitution. You know, 1789 was the US Constitution, and 1889, 100 years later, they were working on the Australian Constitution. They stole lots of things out of there. But the good stuff they left out, you know. Like but there are some elements of the US Constitution and the Australian Constitution. But here we go, a Republican form of government. Here's a little definition. One in which the powers of sovereignty are vested in the people and are exercised by the people, either directly or through representatives chosen by the people, whom those powers are especially delegated, right? And that came out of a Supreme Court decision, which, you know, is a very interesting one, Minor versus Happersett. It was a voter issue Supreme Court decision in Missouri at the time. There was a lady who wanted to vote, and women didn't have the vote, right? Till 1920, right? Right. And so that was in, what was that? It was 1875. And the Supreme Court found that the 14th Amendment, which existed at the time, did not guarantee Americans the right to vote. If you can believe that or not, that was the Supreme Court's position at the time. It wasn't considered a right. Of course, when the 19th Amendment came out, was introduced, adopted, then the Supreme Court established the right to vote, and now they interpret, apparently, if you go to the Wikipedia page on this, it explains that now the Supreme Court, you know, in recent years, 20, 30 years, has really, or since the 60s, has interpreted the 14th Amendment to include right to vote. And there's the Road Utility District #1. Here is the Constitution, you know, it's just reflecting that statement from the Supreme Court decision. Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution says this: inherent power, a Republican form of government, all political power is inherent in the people, and if all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their benefit, the faith of the people of Texas stand pledged to the preservation of a Republican form of government. So if we're going to say that we believe in the rule of law and we want to uphold the law, that's got to be the basis, you know, one of the original, if you like, intent of, or the reason to establish all governments. It's got to be voter involvement. The people have to be involved, not special interests. It doesn't say rich people, dictators, developers, or other special interests. It says the people in general, and that's just, you know, of course, supported and required by the United States Constitution, Article 4, Section 4, which says the same thing. Every state has to have a Republican form of government. This is great. Go to Conservapedia, and you have to search for his page on the Republican form of government. It will disturb you, because when you read it, you'll say, wow, I don't believe in a Republican form of government. When you read some of the details in it, it's amazing, amazing. You know, we're kind of out of whack in some of our thinking. Here, he says, a Republican form of government is closely connected to the idea of civic virtue, the responsibility that citizens owe to their republic, and to the opposition to corruption or the use of public power to the benefit of a politician. Well, I can substitute politician for other special interests, right? Other special interests. The Republican form of government is one in which the powers of sovereignty are vested in the people and are exercised by the people either directly or through representatives chosen by the people. So you get the message. It's the people, the people, the people, the people, the people. I know I'm beating that horse to death, right? And that's Conservapedia, that's where I got that from. Oh, here we go. This is University of Texas students did a study on the origins of local government, the basis of local government in Texas. And they made a comment here. They said the rapid spread of special districts in Texas can be traced to several factors, most notably the inability or the unwillingness of counties and cities to deal with various regional problems. Special districts provide a way that the fragmented power which characterizes local government in Texas can be overcome in order to solve problems. Okay, I don't mind that. Okay, since Texas political culture has tended to call for minimal government, I lost my place. Yeah, 10 the lowest possible taxes, right. Right, special districts provide a mechanism whereby government services can be delivered without existing government assuming responsibility for them, you know. Oh, we don't want to look like we're raising taxes. We don't want to look like we're spending money. Okay. This therefore preserves the myth of limited government while insulating local public officials from citizen complaints about the inadequate service performance or mandatory taxes. You know, it's kind of, when I read that, I think, boy, they were talking about Montgomery County when they wrote that. But, you know, I'm sure every county thinks that, you know, some citizens think that about their own county, I guess. Special districts, okay, here's kind of a little brief about where the special districts came from. Historically, special districts have as their basis amendments to the Constitution of 1876. That's the latest, that's the Constitution we're under now, from the Reconstruction era, with modifications and revisions, of course. Article 1, Section 3, Section 52, 1904, allowed the formation of special districts, you know, what we just talked about. And then there's another article, Section 59, 1917, allowed the establishment of conservation or reclamation districts. And those could be some of the ones that don't tax, by the way. Let's see, is that right? Allowing establishment of conservation and reclamation districts with no limits as to the amount of debt or taxation, excuse me. And that is one of the problems with the powers of special districts. The MUDs are formed under Chapter 54 of the Water Code. And those, they don't have to worry, they're not limited, right, Rosemary, in the amount that they can tax or the amount that they can borrow. You know, they're not limited, like the general forms of government. The county is limited to 25% of the valuation of the properties within the county, and the cities have a similar limit, you know. But because they're not a municipality, they have more leeway. They don't have these restraints. It's like they didn't restrain, instead of restraining government, they gave them, you know, and I hate the term enabling legislation, because that's what it does. It enables them to take your money, you know. So, these special districts, particularly the water districts, they have the power, and the road has some of these powers. They can annex, they can de-annex, they can use eminent domain. They have the power to collect trash. They can collect trash, start a trash service. Apart from all the water things they do, they can have a police force. They can have a police force. They can, when they form and when they annex, they can annex. It doesn't have to be contiguously, right? It doesn't have to be joined together. So, like in the Woodlands, we have one MUD that's down in what's the rich area called down there?
Grogan's Point.
Grogan's Point. Thanks, Rosemary. And then that's 34, isn't it, or something?
No, but that's MUD 2.
MUD 2. Oh well, anyway, one of them's down there, and then there's another piece of it way over.
Oh no, that was MUD 46, which was
46.
Grogan's Point.
Yeah.
And and MUD 2 wouldn't annex them because they were short-sighted. So the developer
anyway,
let them annex up in Sterling Ridge.
So they annexed, you know, not contiguously. So in fact, they can annex anywhere in the state of Texas. Anywhere. Anywhere. I mean, I think that's incredible.
But that was done to help them with their tax rate.
Of course it was.
They had a ridiculous, the highest tax rate of all, and so by annexing, then they were able to lower all the tax rates.
Of course, we could have just had one MUD from the beginning and just kept expanding it, but we know why we didn't do that. But that's another story.
I want to hear why we didn't.
Well, you told me why.
Oh, I did tell you.
Yeah. And why we don't have one MUD in the Woodlands. I'm sorry to all you people who are not from the Woodlands, but the reason is that the developer learned a lesson from Exxon, Friendswood Development down in Friendswood down there. When they had one MUD, they had it's a terrible outcome for a poor developer, is that there were activists, residents that wanted to take over that MUD, and it affected the whole thing, and it spoiled their fun, you know.
No, it spoiled the master plan.
Spoiled the master plan. Well, we can see, you know, and we can see how well the master plan works in the Woodlands. I'll tell you what, everything's been going to plan since the beginning. They've never had to tear up a road. They never had to do anything. Never had to widen the roads. It's all master planned, you know. But anyway, So they decided to divide and conquer. So they would establish one mud and let that grow, and then, you know, there are rules about the appointees and how long they can serve, and, you know, they get confirmed by an election, and then other people can run, and then gradually end up with citizens running that board. So they'd start another one and another one, so they'd maintain control all the way along, and voila, we have 11 muds, right? So,
But that's not just happening in the Woodlands. Developers have created those small muds in all developed areas.
it's everywhere. It's endemic in Texas. You know, there's over 2,700 muds, special districts, not including school districts, which are a special district. There's 1,200 of them. Yes, sir.
Well, I know from doing development years ago in Georgia, the one thing a developer has to do, of course, is pave the roads in the development, or put in the lines, the water lines. On these muds, who's paying for those water lines for the development? Is it the developer still, or do the muds do this? Because I know in the county, remember my commission,
the whole reason they formed them,
spent money for a developer.
I don't know who pays for what exactly. I
Well,
do
I
not
do.
know.
The developer paid for it.
They did.
And then when they want to be reimbursed for that, as they move out of that phase of it, I was very pleased because in some areas, the developer would ask for reimbursement and have a very high tax rate to start off with. In the Woodlands, I felt that the developer waited until there was a sufficient tax base before they asked for reimbursement. And then the mud directors, as it kept growing, had the ability to keep lowering and lowering. My mud was $1.15 when I started, and it's down to about 23 cents per 100.
So, but the outcome with the muds in the Woodlands has been that they're now voter control, which that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. Okay. Let's move on to the next slide. Oh, this is I call cane enable or restrain enable. This is the what do you call it? When you have a split personality, right? Here's schizo. Yeah, it's the schizo part of the Constitution for me. Here's Article 3, Section 52A, right? And this restrains us. This says, except otherwise is provided by the legislature, they shall have no power or to authorise any county, city, or other public corporation or subdivision of the state to lend its credit or grant public money or a thing of value or in aid of to any individual, association or corporation or whatever, right? So you can't use public money for private purposes.
Good Lord, that's there?
It's in the Constitution. And I will tell you what we need, and this is abused in Texas and everywhere in the whole world, but what we need is some kind of public interest attorney that will help us to use this and go and challenge some of this stuff constitutionally. It takes time, it takes effort and money. But then, I don't know why they did this, but that's Article 3, Section 52 minus A, right? It's further down in all the, you go and have a look at the Constitution. It's down there. And this here, loan or grant of public money for economic development. And you know, that's like they say, you know, that's a loophole you can drive a truck through. Or the Queen Mary or the Titanic, which they're rebuilding. An Australian guy is rebuilding the Titanic. Did you know that? Full scale. Right. Yeah. And then he's going to build an iceberg.
There aren't any icebergs, we have global warming.
That's why he has to build one.
So where did it all start? Right? Right? That's what I'm here for. I better hurry up, otherwise we're going to be in trouble. Okay. So where did it all start? I was working on debt. You know, local government debt. It got my attention. This was in 2009, 2010. 2008, 2009, 2010, anyway, 2009 and 10, I was really on fire, really researching, trying to, you know, and some of these conservative organisations invited me to go and testify to these committees, which, you know, the senators and congressmen, they just go, oh, all right. They don't even listen, you know, oh yeah, that's all good, yeah, thanks Mr. Heath, you know, and they wait till, they let all the elected officials, you know, you go to these committee meetings, you know, and all the elected officials, they get to waffle on endlessly, you know, and take up all the time, and there's no time limits. Oh, these public interest people and civic groups and members of the public, 5 o'clock, you know, they're getting ready to go home. Oh, yeah, we better make room, you know. So, yeah, can you hurry it up a bit, this and that? I mean, literally, they don't give a hang about the public. But anyway, you know, I was doing this stuff on public debt, and I wrote stuff about how much debt there was per capita, and said that Texas, I discovered that Texas has the most local government debt of any state, per capita of any state in the union. The most of any state, right? If you add the interest in, I mean, it's horrendous. It's like, you know, $10,000 per head, local government debt. You know, it's huge, huge. And then, you know, the actual, you know, we've got 298 billion and counting. California's the highest. There's 5 states in the top, you know, in the top 5. We're in the top 5 anyway. Anyway, I was going through this is a little screenshot from the Texas Bond Review Board, and the Texas Bond Review Board regulates state bonds, but the Bond Review Board, so they function, they kind of, as a side, they kind of keep track of what the local government's borrowing and spending, you know, just as a courtesy, you know, and they have a good records, you know, and so you can get it, but you go there and you can search and you can see, you know, what your school district has, what your city has, what your special district, what debt they have, right? And so I was going through the Woodlands, you know, looking in the Woodlands and in Montgomery County, and I came across this Woodlands Road Utility District number 1. And this is in 2010, January. I found this. Is everything all right?
Yeah, it's fine.
Oh.
You were fine.
yeah, and you know, the thing that got me, it was Conroe ISD one time. Just a little side issue here. One time I found 3 bond issues for Conroe ISD, and see this column here? It had 3 issues, and see this column here, principal, it had 220,000, 220,000, 220,000, and here it had like 3 million, 3 million, 3 million, you know? And I called them up and I said, hey, you know, did you make a mistake? You know, is the 220 meant to be in the interest column and the millions meant to be... And they said, oh, no, that's a special bond. It's a capital appreciation bond. So back when Rob Eisler was on the board at the Conroe ISD, they borrowed $150 million or something one time, and out in amongst that, there was like $1 million, you know, and it was split up into 220,000, roughly $1 million. They didn't pay any principal or interest until the maturity. So it was just compounded and compounded and compounded. So there was 3 little issues there, $660,000, and the interest was $10.4 million. I mean, that's what got me on the, you know, warpath about local government debt. I could not believe it. Anyway, I found this and I said, what is this? I've lived in the Woodlands since 1990, and this thing here, I've never heard of the Woodlands Road Utility District until 2010, January. And so I called up Peggy Houseman and Tom Campbell, who were on the board over there. I said, Peggy, hey, Peggy, what's this? And she said, oh, I don't know anything about it. I don't know. But I'll find out. I'm going to email Mike Page. You need to talk to Mike Page. And so Mike Page, I don't know if you know, but Mike Page is one of the attorneys for the Woodlands Woodlands Township, and he's the attorney for the Sandy Centre River Authority and the Houston Ship Channel and all the MUDs. His son's now taken over for the Sandy Centre River Authority. We found out.
The town center pays Mike Page $400,000 a year.
And he's worth every penny of it.
That's what they said. He's worth every penny.
He's worth every penny of it. So Mike Page. So, you know, call Mike Page. So I called over there and I got his secretary and said, well, you know, what's this? And by the way, at the time, I was on the ballot as an independent candidate for county judge, right? At the time. I just filed in December, just in time, you know, before it ran out, and I was on the ballot. You know, I had to go and collect signatures. As an independent, you have to go and beg for signatures. You know, I wanted to run as an independent to make a point because I thought, you know, Montgomery County is ready for an independent. You know, they're sick of all these party types, and they're going to vote me in. You know, just like that. It'll be easy. You know. And I made a mistake. I will admit, I made a mistake. I misread that. So I was running for county judge, but I was still doing this work on the debt. And so I called up, and Julie Kime is the lady down there at Swartz Page Harding, the law firm that is the general officers for the Road Utility District and many, many other districts too. And what's this? She says, well, you know, it was formed in 1991 and this and that. She kind of gave me a brief thing, you know, brief overview. And there's 5 board members, and I mean, there's all board members. Well, I said, well, are there any seats open, you know, because I'm always looking to try and get people to run for local stuff like the MUDs and the what have you. And she says, well, in fact, yes, there's 3 seats open this, you know, March 8th, May 8th, you know, election, May 8th election. I said, well, hey, send us a ballot application, will you? And she thought I wanted it for me, you know, but anyway, she emailed me the ballot application. And I thought, well, we'll get someone to run, you know. And next thing, Mike Hayes calls me up. Oh, Adrian, Mr. Heath, yeah. I'd never spoken to him before. He says, yeah, real glad for you to run for the board position at the Road Utility District. He says, but there's just not going to be an election. This is the first thing he tells me on the phone. There's just not going to be. I said, what? He says, well, Texas law, it's a funny thing. He says, Texas law is a funny thing. And he says, there's just no residents in the district. So what happens every year? He says I hadn't seen that map, right? He saw the map. He says, you know, every year because there's no voters. He says, you know, it's a holdover board, and you know, there's a process, and you know, they just keep their seats, you know. And we haven't had an election since 2000. And you know, it's just instinctively, you know, all that stuff about the Republican form of government, I'm thinking that, you know, I didn't have it all, you know, in detail, you know, oh, this is a violation, you know. But I mean, it just irked me. It really bothered me. So I said, okay, well, you know, Mike, thanks, Mike. You know, I'd like to see the check registers, you know, because we were on a binge, you know. One of our guys, if you know, I don't know if you know Jim Jenkins, but back in 2007, he got onto this check register thing, and he got the township's check registers for a couple of years running. And you know, he found in that budget there was over $640,000 worth of checks written to what do you call them? Non-for-profits. And they were all, you know, some of them might have been really good causes, but you know, I mean, that's a violation of the principle of tax, you know.
Right.
If we're going to give to charity, then you know, you and you write your check for charity. The government's not the surrogate for our tax dollars to give it to charity, right? And then, you know, when you dig down into these companies that are the charities, guess what? You find all these same people all around, you know, they're all in the orbit of the Woodlands, you know. It's like, it's a club, you know, it's a club. Yeah. So, you know, Mitchell's granddaughter or something or other, and, I mean, you'd find stuff like that. You know, one time they wrote a check, you know, the roof got blown off the pavilion, remember that? And the township kicked in for that, you know, oh yeah, man, it's tourism, we've got to look after them, you know. Never mind, you know, it's the most successful open-air pavilion in world history, you know. It's a not-for-profit that needs a handout, you know. I mean, there's lots of examples of that, you know, the taxis and all this and that, and the horse and rider crew, and, you know, it's everywhere, it's just everywhere. Anyway, so we cleaned that up. One thing I really ticked them off about was, and I believe in education, you know, contrary to popular opinion, but I believe in education, but there's this outfit called the Education for Tomorrow Fund, and it was founded by all the shining lights in the Woodlands, you know, and all the business establishment. And if you go to its, you know, website, it says it's a joint effort between the citizens and business to further education. And you know, they do the science fair every year, and I'm not denigrating that at all. I love the science fair. I think it's great. The students get to go and, you know, expand their minds and use their learning and impress us with, you know, with genuine science and inventions and whatever they do. You know, it's wonderful. But I looked at, you know, who's the Education for Tomorrow Fund? Where's it getting its money from? Well, I found them on the check register of the Conroe ISD. And it was 60 grand. It was 60 grand every year. And I started asking questions, and I found that they were just, doing a poll tax, but, they were charging Conroe ISD for their services. It was $1.50 a student, $1.50 per student. Now there's 50,000 students, or it was 45,000 at the time or something, students. They weren't all using the services of the Education for Tomorrow Alliance, I can tell you, And so I challenged that, and there was a whole big rigmarole and uproar, and they had a hearing, and I tried. And in the end, they stopped doing that. They didn't have a contract. They didn't have nothing, And I really tried to get them to analyse what they were doing. And then eventually, the township was writing checks to their outfit too, and they ended up stopped doing that too. And now, the businesses are funding their giveaways to the students themselves, however they do it, and that's the way it should be. That's the way it should be. Claude Hunter, he said, we've got to compete. We've got to compete. China's eating our lunch. Those kids over in China are smart. Our kids are dumb. I said, yeah, well, look what China's done. They don't even have the Education for Tomorrow Alliance. So, I think it speaks for itself. Anyway, so, I digress. So anyway, the bond debt is what led me to the Road Utility District, and then I found out that there were no voters in the district, and then it started to kind of go funny from there. Here's an email from Mike. Here's an email. Now notice he was writing back to Peggy Houseman, right? Because Peggy, after I spoke to Peggy shot off. I didn't show you Peggy's email. She said, "What's this and what's that? And where do you get your money? And how much do the board members paid?" And all these, kind of sharp questions, yeah. And he says, as we've discussed on several previous occasions, the road has been in existence since 1991 to assist in financing major road improvement projects. We'll look at the map again in a minute and see what the major road. As was discussed with Steve Burkhead, I don't know if you remember him, during the tenure as General Manager of the WCA, this is before the township, and John Rutledge, Assistant Manager of the WS, who attended and monitored the meetings of the Rudd Board of Directors for approximately 2 years before his departure. The boundaries and the taxing jurisdiction of the Rudd include only commercial and retail properties that were added by the petition of the landowner. So some landowner just begged, he said, "Come on, I want to be taxed." That's what happened. And we know who that was. But anyway, and it was all totally selfless, and that's why they did it. He says, the retail by the landowner, no residential properties are included or subject to taxation. Well, there's a big question mark on that now. The Rudd finances improvements to major thoroughfares only, he emphasises again, when the county is unable or unwilling to do so, and the completed projects are then turned over to the county for operation. We know that. Since the last 2 houses, here's a good one. Since the last 2 houses were torn down for construction for the waterway under Grogansville Road, there's been no residents or voters. None. There's no voters, in the Rudd. The directors receive a per diem, $25. It's 27 now, which is very modest, isn't it, Rosemary?
I'm sorry, I was...
$27. I mean, you guys take 100, right?
For per diem?
Yeah.
Oh, and what were you saying about 27?
They only take 27. It's very modest.
That would be modest.
Yeah, it's very modest.
Tea hors d'oeuvre, is that right?
Well, anyway, I mean, I don't understand those board members. They should take 100. But if either of the county or the TWDC advances funds to the Rudd, right? If the county advances funds to the Rudd, at the Rudd's request to finance a project for which the Rudd has insufficient funds until its next bond issue, those advanced funds are repaid next time there's a bond issue. Of course, Mike Page is a bond attorney, did I mention that? The current tax rate is 47 cents per 100. The Rudd is administered by the Board of Directors, consisting of 5 long-term residents. Long-term residents. For almost 20 years, the Rudd has represented the business community's undertaking to pay a substantial additional tax, not applicable to any residents. Again, he says not to any in order to finance the road improvements well in advance of or in addition to what the county is willing and able to do. These improvements benefit both the business community and the residents of the Woodlands. All this has been discussed with Mr. Heath, while the benefits of the community are readily apparent, he says it's readily apparent.
Wait, Adrian, now I'm a little confused on that, because now, for me to sit or run for MUD, I don't know about a RUD, school board, I have to be a resident within that jurisdiction, that boundary.
That's a
How do
good
they have
point.
board members that aren't residents?
I forgot about that. That's one of the peculiarities of the road. It is. You know, we had a
So
freshman.
can I run for that RUD as a board member? I live over in Chateau
Let me
Woods.
tell you. So there was a freshman state rep in 1991. Anyone know what his name was?
Was that Rob Iser or?
Kevin Brady.
Oh, Kevin Brady.
And, you know, I guess, you know, he's got to dance with the ones that brung him. You know, he used to be at the chamber and he was, you know. And guess what? His first piece of legislation he put through was the enabling legislation for the road. Yeah. Yeah. And in that legislation it says, you know, the qualifications for the directors of the road, which we're getting ahead of myself. I was going to discuss that, but I was going to talk about it. You know, Rosemary, you have to be a resident of MUD 60, don't you? Are you?
Yeah, well, the mine,
Which one are you in? I'm sorry.
47.
Oh, it used to be in mine. You used to live in, didn't you?
I was never in 60.
Oh, excuse me. Okay. Well, anyway.
You learn something every day.
Yeah. So anyway, you got to live where, you know, where you serve. Well, you know, that was one of the things I found out about this road when I spoke to Julie Combs. I said, well, you know, what's the qualifications for the ballot? Because she was a bit shocked when I asked for the ballots. She said, oh, well, I don't know if you can run. I said, well, what's the qualification? I'll have a look. And she did call me back and she said, you've got to be 18 years old. Got to be a resident of the state of Texas. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and you
So
can't
I
be
can
insane or a felon, just to throw those two in.
So I can run.
Anybody can. Yeah. Look, Billy Bob out in Muleshoe can run and run our road, right? But now if you want to get elected, well, there's no voters. There's no voters. So, you know, I mean, I don't know. It's like the Bermuda Triangle or something. You know?
Adrian,
Yes,
I
ma'am.
did find out something recently when they did the redistricting, that you do not have to be a resident of the congressional district you run in.
That's true. That's absolutely
I found
true.
that quite amazing.
You can be anywhere to vote for a congressional district. That's absolutely true. Yes, ma'am. And I was surprised to know that too. Like, you know, someone from Muleshoe could run against Kevin Brady, and we wish they would. Sorry. Anyway, here's another. This is March the 9th. I like this one. This is when he replied to my request for stuff. Attached to the minutes, blah blah blah. Most recent audit report, list of check registers, you know, the debt service. It's all there as requested. He says, and as requested, he said, then since, because I said, see what happened was he said there's no voters in the district, and then he gave me the map. You know, he gave me the map. And so I said, well, wait a minute, I'll have a look at this map, you know, and you saw the map. And I found voters registered in the district, you know. I've got an 8th grade education, and I found voters. He gets $400,000 a year, there's no voters. So,
Sorry, it's hard to make them disagree.
where was I? I'm sorry. He says, since there are no residents in the district, there's no document that's responsive to your request for a list. I asked this, you know, highfalutin sentence, a list enumerating any residents or voters whose registered address is inside the district. So these materials here, you know, there you are. There's no voters. That's my there's no voters in the district email. And this is, I just copied this, but I've got the emails and they're online. You can see them at fellowresidents.info if you're interested. You know, so there's no voters. March the 6th. So there's no voters. Yes, sir.
Oh, the Courier did a story last week about the road,
Yeah.
and they said that they found that there were like 14 or 15 people who were registered to vote in there, but they could only find 3 of them.
I like the comment there. And you know, you saw there was one little quote, one sentence from me in there. One little, you know, Adrian Heath said this, you know, we were on the phone together 15 minutes, and he says, well, if I need to ask any more questions, can I call you back? I said, yes, I call back, now call me back. Another 30 minutes. And then all he used was the definition of residence from the Secretary of State, and this one little comment on that. You know.
Adrian?
Yes. Yes.
I would believe, though, that the way I understand it is that you're not supposed to use your business address, you're supposed to use your home address. And that many of those people that were on that list you're talking about were actually using their business address.
Well, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
Yeah, that's key. That's key. Yeah. Yeah, so, you know, Mike thinks he's the Secretary of State, I suppose. But he says, you know, following your email, so I was telling you, I was painting this picture. So, you know, he said there's no voters in the district, no voters, and I got the map, and I found voters, and then something else went on, which we'll get to in a minute. But then he sent me this email, so that was March the 26th. Remember, it was March the 9th. There were no voters on March the 9th. Right. On March the 8th with Peggy there were no voters, and on March the 9th there were still no voters. And now it's March the 26th. And then he copied in Peggy. It says, following your request, I requested that a complete canvass of the boundaries of the road be made to confirm that there are no registered voters in the district. Several days later, I was advised that only one parcel of land in the district was shown on MCAD records as not being restricted to commercial or retail use. After further inquiry, we found, I mean, it's like this was all a big surprise. It was just like, it just emerged out of nowhere. He'd never crossed his mind. And you'll see why I'm emphasizing that in a minute, you know. This is like total shock news, you know. He says, we found that this property is owned by Dirk and Katie Larkian, who apparently they own several buildings in the Woodlands. And they received specific deed restriction permission to construct and maintain a residence adjacent to one of their office buildings. Following up on this development, it appears that a residence is being constructed on this property. It's just incredible. It's occupied by the Larkins.
He's not paid enough to know all the residences on the road.
No, that's right. I mean, you know, it's not none of his
But
business.
you know,
He doesn't know these people.
I had to investigate this myself after I heard this.
Yeah.
And so I drove over there and I passed the place 20 times because I couldn't find a residence.
Well, I must point out, you know, Mr. Larkian, I have no beef with Mr. Larkian. And, you know, in this, as we get into the question of residency and who should have it and who shouldn't, it's, you know, he's a private citizen and he's allowed to enjoy the benefits of the law of the state of Texas and the United States of America too. So I'm not questioning any of that. We'll get, you know, I just want to preface, you know, what's coming up. So, okay, so 1991, the road was developed, right? They set the boundaries of the road, taking mainly the roads, right? And this is my language here. Token puppet residents were required by law to form the road and confirm their puppet board at the first election. Now, that is standard practice. That's, you know, that is true. And this is what the developers do all over. You've got to form a mud or a RUD or whatever, you know, the landowners, there's got to be a landowner or owners somewhere, and they petition or they get, you know, legislature to write up and form this RUD for them, or there's a mechanism to do it through TCEQ, or there's a way, or you go and get your state rep to make one for you, you know. He'll create one, right, which is what happened with the RUD. And so whoever the developer landowners are, in this case it was the Woodlands Development Company, was the landowner, right? They then, you know, said, well, who's going to be the board members, you know, and somehow they came up with 5 board members, which, you know, pardon me?
Conveniently.
Well, no, I mean, they found 5 board members, that's fine. And then they have to have residents that confirm at a confirmation election the board members, so that they are duly elected, you know, as a Republican form of government requires, as it requires. And they did this. I've got an affidavit here. This is interesting, and it's got the voter registration of one of the one of the first, and you can look at this, one of the first voters in the road, Janet Council. Anyone know Janet Council? Is she here? So Janet Council, this is in 1991, and Janet Council was born in 1961, right? So Janet Council, 20 years old, and she...
30.
Huh?
30
years.
30 years old. What did I say? 30 years old. She helped establish the road, and she signed this affidavit. Now it says the election. Now the election laws must have been different in '91, and I don't, you know, I'm going to investigate this because I just noticed it the other day. I've had these for a while. I maintain my domicile within the district for more than 30 days prior to January 18th, 1992. So apparently you could have elections in January, you know. I hope, otherwise there'll be trouble. But, so she says here, on January 18th, my domicile was within the boundaries of the Road Utility District. I voted at the confirmation and directors election within the said district for the 18th day of, 1992 of January. For the confirmation and creation of the organisation. I also voted in the election held on the 18th day of January, which was submitted the questions of whether the Board of Directors of the said district should be authorised to issue bonds, $44.2 million. And this is what they do. I mean, all of these are formed this way. They get these token people to go and live on the property somewhere, and there was a couple of houses, and it was at 9700 Grogan's Mill Road. The address does not exist anymore. There's no 9700 Grogan's Mill Road anymore, and you'll see why. So when he said, what was I saying here? So they get the residents, they vote and confirm and form officially the district. And that's all lawful, and it's the way it's done. But, I mean, it's stretched to weird limits. You'll find up in Dallas there's a story of a developer, and he got a young guy, he put a FEMA trailer out in this place, and he just went and lived there for a couple of months and got his voter registration done, and he went and voted in, $100 million worth of bonds. I think Mike Bass talked about that here when he was here last week, or a couple of weeks ago. He mentioned that example. Another one up in Tarrant County somewhere, there was a young kid, 19, and his girlfriend was 23, and they did the same thing. They went and they set a tax rate, some huge tax rate for this district, which is going to have future residents. There were none at the time. Set the tax rate at 33 cents or something, and borrowed $129 million worth of money. These two voters, and then they just go. They come and they go. They come and they go, And it's all, it's legal. Yes, sir.
That kind of makes you wonder how much they got paid to do that.
Well, they might pay them. I don't know. That's probably legal too. I don't know. They subsidise their rent, or it's free. They might pay them something. I don't know if that's illegal or not. I'm sure that they can't pay them for their vote. I'll be certain of that.
Probably
Yes,
give
ma'am.
them a gift.
Well, I know that they advertise at the Lone Star College for people, for students to do that. They will pay for their rent.
Really?
To do what?
That is
To go
viable.
live on my property for months and then they vote.
Okay. Well, there you go.
That's election fraud. That's election.
Oh, they do that all the time.
There's probably, nothing surprises me. Nothing surprises me. But there's a reason for this leniency, which we'll get to also. There's a reason.
That's what she said.
Okay, so that's Mike Page, that's Bill Neal. Mike Page is our attorney, isn't he, Rosemary? Mike Page and Bill Neal. Bill Neal is the last surviving original appointee of the road. He's still there today. He's a realtor, and that's Bill. And okay, so we've got a special district, 1991, Kevin Brady, 5-member board, all their appointees. They've had elections in 92 and 93, 2000 and 2010. Well, 2010 was because we got involved. There's no voters in the district, that's what Mike told me. They had 43, now they've got 43 cents, it was 47 cents. They got $110 million in debt because when I count debt, I count the interest. Call me stupid, All these elected officials, when they talk about their debt, they talk about some of the debt and they don't include the interest. Well, we've got to pay back the interest, you know? And so it's 110 million and counting, right? The offices, now this is another thing about that's it's legal, and this annoys me. You know, the official offices of the road are not even in the district. They're in Mike Page's office, in that office in the Galleria. I've been there, right? And that's legal. So you want something from the road? Oh yeah, you're more than welcome. And he said in that email, you're more than welcome to come down and inspect the records any time. It's an 80-mile drive, 40 miles each way. And then the records you want, they're in storage. These records that you can look at over there, I had to pay $80 to get them out of storage. And then they let me have the copies for free, you know. In fact, on that one email there, Mike said he was giving me those at his own firm's expense. He was just giving them to me out of the goodness of his own heart. You know, which that was nice of him. That was nice of him. But, you know, it's just ridiculous that the districts are so loosely governed. There's no website. You know, there's no accountability to voters because there's no voters, right? And you got to, you know, you got to drive miles to go and inspect anything. Okay. The board meetings. The board meetings they would meet in the developer's office, in the Woodlands Development Company office. After I started going to the meetings, they suddenly stopped meeting in the Woodlands Development office.
Who owns the Woodlands Development Office?
That's a good question. That is a very good question. We're going to get to the answer to that in a second.
What was the question?
Who owns the building of the developer?
Okay.
Wonder who it could be. Various surrogate spokesmen. Why did I put that there? That's because you will go far and wide to find a board member of the Road Utility District make a public comment. I spent time Googling and searching a couple of years ago to find mention of the Road Utility District and the board members on the Courier website. And the only time I met, and I won't mention his name, but one of the board members had passed away in 2000, and he was mentioned in the paper connected with the Road Utility District. You know? No. Who makes comments? Who speaks on behalf of the RUD whenever there's a quote? It's someone from the developer, the Woodlands Development Company, or it's the Precinct 3 chairman, commissioner, excuse me. You know?